Hello, friends, and welcome to the Gesundheit Kitchen, or at least a remote version of the Gesundheit Kitchen. We are today visiting my friend Leticia, talking about coffee and how to incorporate it back into your diet. Now, for myself and for a lot of gastrectomy patients or partial gastrectomy patients, coffee can be a little bit tough after your surgery, as you're learning to kind of what you can and can't eat. And for a time, it was something that I genuinely missed. Not so much for the caffeine, but for the sort of ceremony of it, for the flavor of it. So I wanted to have a conversation about coffee and about how it can be a part of your life without being afraid of it. So obviously you guys are bringing in the beans green and roasting them. So without getting way too technical, let's just talk about, for someone with a sensitive GI, what would be sort of the easiest, less acidic coffee for someone like that?
Great question. So I always recommend starting at a medium roast or darker.
Okay.
That's going to have less acidity in the coffee. Anything medium and like medium light to light is going to have that high acidity because it's been in the roaster less time and roasted probably at a little bit of a lower temperature.
That's almost counterintuitive to what I would have thought. Like
Really?
I was always thinking like darker meant stronger and stronger meant more acidic, and I'm an espresso guy and always have been.
Yeah.
So that's really good to know. So I'm sort of in the safe zone as far as acidity goes. Now,
Right.
let's talk about cold brew. In that process, is that more or less acidic?
So good question. That's going to be a very stable way of brewing coffee. Again, it'll come down to the roast type.
Okay.
What's really cool about cold brew is the fact that you're actually steeping the coffee in the water for 24 hours. So you end up with a really smooth cup of coffee. I don't know the exact acidity comparison compared to drip coffee, but I would say ultimately it probably comes down to the roast.
Okay. Well, so let's look at then caffeine from the point of, like, say, a regular drip coffee versus espresso. Again, having been an espresso guy, I like the intensity of the flavor.
Yeah.
I've never personally felt like increased sort of like hyperactivity or that kind of thing with espresso. But what is caffeine-wise on the spectrum, drip versus espresso?
I love that question. It's one I get very often. It's actually the same. It's the same amount of caffeine whether you're looking at an Americano, a shot of espresso, or a drip cup of coffee. The difference is the way you're extracting the coffee and also the way you're intaking it. So for an example, if you're taking a shot of espresso, you're taking very concentrated coffee all at once. So of course you're going to get that jolt versus a drip cup of coffee that you're drinking slowly over time. If you're a liquor drinker, you could compare it to maybe having a cocktail versus a shot.
Got
you know,
it.
very similar things. Same amount of caffeine, but the way it's dispersed into your body over time is going to be different.
It's literally watered down or diluted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, just more water with the same amount of caffeine.
That's a great way of
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that. I had always either thought or assumed that an espresso roast was more somehow that roasting process intensified not only the flavor but the caffeine, but I guess that's not the case.
Yeah, and one of our favorite things to tell people is you can make espresso with any coffee. It truly is the way you're extracting the coffee. So even though here at Alma we have an espresso roast, we actually use a medium roast on our espresso machine. We find it has more sweetness and more of a balance. We have that espresso roast because it's more of what people are looking for in a traditional shot of espresso, but we prefer things a little bit on the brighter, more complex side at our cafe, so we actually throw a medium roast on there.
Well, I am not typically a fan of sort of flavored coffees, but I have noticed the different regions actually have different innate flavors, like blueberry or these sort of floral notes. What's kind of your favorite there?
So the different tasting profiles can come from so many different things. The first is going to be what is the drying process of that coffee and the washing process of the coffee. So you can have a wet wash, a natural, or a honey process. Naturals and honeys are just going to be a longer drying period, dried a little bit differently than a traditional wet wash coffee. If you're out and about at any fast food chain or just drinking a casual cup of coffee, most likely it's a wet wash process. That's going to be more of a chocolatey type coffee note coffee. Versus a honey and natural are going to be more on the floral and fruity side. So someone who does have stomach sensitivities or someone who has GI issues probably would not recommend a honey or a natural because there's going to be more acidity in it. So you want to stick to a wet wash coffee where it's just more of that staple, quick drying, wet washed coffee type that will have more of the chocolatey notes to it.
That is a great answer. You know, I have a friend, and this is just me telling a story, but he sent me some Ethiopian beans, telling me it was blueberry flavor, and I thought, I'm not going to like this. I don't want a blueberry flavored coffee.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. It was just the Ethiopian bean, and it had those berry notes, and it was delicious.
Oh, good.
And I was just so surprised that coffee, I guess much like wine, it's picking up the notes of where it's grown and the weather conditions. And
yeah, it comes down to so many things. The variety of the beans, again, the way it's wet washed or processed, even the side of the mountain or the terroir it was grown on, and then again, roasting too. You can roast it really light to really bring out the complexity, or kind of roast it pretty dark and take away some of that complexity and some of those bright notes and bring out more of the chocolatiness to it. There's so much that goes into coffee, it's hard to say one thing that might change the tasting notes.
Well, just from a purely practical side, so I'm a coffee drinker and I find my local roaster and I buy a pound of beans.
Yeah.
What's the best? I've heard freezer versus not freezer. So what's your advice on that?
I say do what makes you happy, but you're not going to see much of a difference with the freezer. Yeah. We just recommend consume your coffee within 2 months of it being roasted. That's the optimal flavor. Of course, you're not going to get necessarily like salmonella poisoning or anything from coffee, but if you want that optimal flavor, we recommend consuming it within 2 months.
I think it's like anything else. It has almost sort of a decay, like a curve, right? So even with spices, if you buy a giant thing of cinnamon, it's going to taste great, and then it just sort of, that law of diminishing returns over time as it's exposed to air and sunlight, or you know, just in the environment, it's going to kind of fade over time.
Yeah, so the best way to store coffee is always holding. I know that's not really practical for everyone, but if you can, that's the best way to do it. And then in an airtight canister. We have some here at the cafe that are absolutely phenomenal with patented technology that's going to keep it super fresh and nice and cool and dark. That's the best way to keep it.
I think it's the same like when you're talking about even pepper. If you buy pre-ground pepper, it kind of tastes like pepper, but when you're actually cracking pepper at the moment,
it's so different.
Totally different.
Yes,
thing.
So different.
So tell me a little bit about sort of the origin story of this whole operation.
Yeah, so we started about 4 years ago, and really the foundation of our business is in the farming side. We want to educate consumers on what it takes to bring coffee to you. What you see here, our open concept cafe and roastery where you can come in and see the whole process, it truly is only 50% of what happens. We have over 250 pickers that move onto the farm with us every single year just to provide you this 1 cup of coffee. And we want to highlight the faces, the hardworking people that contribute to that, the countless hands. And then here in the US, of course, roasting fresh, being able to talk to people about the roasting process, educate on why store-bought coffee that's been on the shelf for over a year probably isn't as good as freshly roasted coffee. So that really is our business. It's going down to improving lives, crafting extraordinary coffee, and using sustainable practices.
That's awesome. Now, you mentioned, so you have a personal connection to this whole industry. Can you talk about that a little bit? Yeah,
so I was actually born into the coffee industry, which is a very big honor to be able to say. I'm a 5th generation coffee farmer. Wow. So my roots are in coffee farming in Honduras at our family farms. And when my husband and I left our corporate careers, we wanted to build on the coffee farming origin and do something our family had never done before, which was actually roast coffee. So before my husband and I, our family had never, ever, ever roasted our own coffee. We just sold it on the local market, and we have no idea where it would end up. Today we control the entire process from farm to cup. Every single step, our family is involved in it, and it's a quality that you can't really find anywhere else.
No, that's amazing. Well, that absolutely helped me understand a little more how the different roasts and different types of coffee can affect us. But one of the things I didn't fully understand when I started incorporating coffee back into my diet was sometimes it's not so much the coffee that is causing the GI distress, it's what you add to the coffee. So if you haven't figured it out yet or not, a lot of us are lactose intolerant, or at least lactose sensitive. So if you are having problems with coffee and you like to add milk to your coffee, try it with a milk alternative like oat milk or almond milk or soy milk, whichever one works best for you. Because the fat molecules of traditional dairy sometimes don't quite get absorbed, and when you mix that with a coffee, it can cause all sorts of issues. The second piece of advice I would give is sugar, because As you may have learned already, sugar can be a kind of a Russian roulette sort of relationship. I use stevia when I drink coffee because it doesn't affect my glycemic index. Or if I am going to have sugar, if that's my only option, I use very, very small amounts of it. And I've actually learned to love, unsweetened coffee. So there is something about that just sort of natural flavor of coffee that, again, if you're used to drinking what Americans think of as sort of that sort of donut shop coffee, which is very light and very sweet, you might want to try to kind of back off of the milk or the milk substitute and the sugar and really enjoy the actual bean. Now, at the end of the day, if you don't like the taste of coffee, you have other options. Of course, tea is excellent, and I love both of them, but coffee or tea, whatever you got, I'm happy with. But there are, of course, tea is a whole separate conversation, everything from green tea to white tea to, herbal teas. Yerba mate, which is actually it's a member of the holly family. It's grown in South America. It's another great option for if you need that warm kind of pick me up. It's naturally sort of a caffeine style stimulant, and it's really good and also really kind of easy on the GI system. So just because you aren't a huge fan of coffee doesn't mean you don't have some options there. As always, take care of yourselves. Thanks for joining us on the Gesundheit Kitchen, and we will look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, Gesundheit.